Hey everybody, welcome back to the Growth Minded Podcast, and thanks for taking the time to listen or watch our show. In this episode, I'm joined by Joe Kirgues, co-founder of Generator, one of the top accelerators in the region. In fact, Joe, Troy, and their team are consistently ranked amongst the leading accelerators in the country. I wanted to bring him into the studio to gain his insights on a few different topics. First, a conversation with Joe is incomplete without touching on their efforts at Generator. They've been running full speed for a few years now, but Joe still lights up talking about the companies from even their first cohort, and his memory is off the charts. It was also important for me to get his perspective on the overall early stage landscape in Milwaukee. In a city known for falling behind in entrepreneurial endeavors, Joe's a bit of a shining beacon who isn't ready to write us off quite yet. He dissects Milwaukee as well as some neighboring cities who fare better in launching early stage companies. One of the great things about Joe is he's not shy about sharing his reasons, his thought process in terms of how and why Milwaukee has fallen behind. From the city's identity to the correlating lack of capital entering Milwaukee, he brings a fresh perspective to the conversation. Can Milwaukee sustain its entrepreneurial spirit, or are we doomed to fall behind smaller, neighboring markets? Find out with Joe Kirgues on the Growth Minded Podcast. Pretty amazing that in 2014, you hit number 14 on the accelerator list. Heavy Silicon Valley and even Southern Cal influence on that list.
Right.
A little bit of Chicago, a little one on St. Louis, and you guys, right?
Right.
You've got premiere night coming up on next Thursday, right? So you're within a week.
Yep. The Milwaukee Performing Arts Center.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what goes into the next week for you?
Yeah. So the joke that we tell is that every 6 months we find 600 of the wealthiest, most judgmental people we can and ask them to review our work over an open bar. So that for us, the application is we do 2 12-week programs a year for Generator. And the capstone of each program is what we call a premiere night. So it'll be an event where 6 companies chosen from a pool of over 650 will come in and do 5 to 6 minute presentation of their company as they're introducing it to the public. So
let's talk about that for a second. So first of all, 650 applicants and just the process of working through narrowing that list to 6. And then what does it take to get into that 1% selection criteria?
So it's Generator's themes have changed as we've grown. So when we first started, we were looking for companies that were like, for example, an Eat Street or an Abodo, companies that were serving markets that weren't being served by market leaders. So Eat Street is the country's 3rd largest online food court, but it's predominant in markets 11 through 30. Whereas when we invested in them, the leading market player, Grubhub, was really focused on markets 1 through 10. We still do that kind of fast follower model. So companies that are light on working capital, but they've demonstrated that they can go to market relatively quickly. They're showing traction, and they know, a customer costs X, they're worth Y, and that growth rate we can fuel with that free cash flow from customers. So that's what it started, and so it's very engineering heavy. It's very oftentimes you have a lead business person, operations person, salesperson on the profile, and they're distinguishing themselves with their execution. Mm-hmm. That's changed over time. We're now getting more opportunities to invest in companies that are creating a new market. The ones that can turn working capital faster in pursuit of that are, they're going to be higher in revenue and higher in multiple. Mm-hmm. But we're also looking at companies that are creating a new market and require larger amounts of working capital. And so, if it's a fast follower, we want to see traction. If it's something that, we're really struggling to find another comparable, we're looking to see just how big is that market opportunity and is this the team to do it? So I'd say it goes into those 3 categories: the fast follower, the light working capital, new market creator, and then the larger working capital, but also probably a larger multiple to revenue on the valuation. So that's the kind of range of things we're looking for, and it's tied together with typically engineers who can arbitrage their labor to create wealth.
How long does that selection cycle typically take? What sort of man hours go into that process for you?
Hey, we were just talking about it today. So it really begins, our premiere night will close November 3rd. And then our program, we expand. We have a staff of 8. We expand our staff to go full-time recruiting. So everyone takes 2 or 3 markets. And so we'll spend 4 or 5 weeks going out and doing coffees in those markets. So I think last time we did, and this won't be complete, but it's the best that my memory can recall. I know we did Boston, Ann Arbor, Detroit, Indianapolis, Chicago, Minneapolis, Nashville, Atlanta, Las Vegas, Miami. And we'll do one-on-ones during those visits there. And that's where we supplement that with 4 or 5 other channels for recruiting. And we're building that deep pool of applications. And so it's not passive. It's very proactive to get to know them. But that also serves as our first due diligence point. So a disproportionate number of the companies that got in, we had already spoken to during the application process. And then we go through, there's an application process, and that's designed to filter for those 3 kind of themes that we're building on, and gain information about, is this, an engineer who can build the company? Is this a team with the kind of background that can drive sales and reduce distribution risk? What is it about that distinguishes them relative to their peers? We'll go on the next 2 weeks. We'll do the first round of interviews. So we'll talk to 100 startups, sometimes as few as 50, depending on how much we like that applicant pool. Then we'll narrow it down to a final 22 or 24. And from there, we'll select, in this case, it was 6, but usually it's about 5 companies to go and make that investment into. And so, typically we've spoken to them at least 4 times, usually 6 times by the time they get into the program, starting with that first in-market visit and extending to multiple rounds of interviews.
Mm-hmm. So you're coming up on 5 years now, and this is program 9?
Program 9, yeah.
And I just read that you just surpassed $100 million in follow-on investment. Can you talk a little bit about some of the alumni? You mentioned Eat Street before. That's a chunk of that. But where are the other highlights?
Yeah, so generator companies this year, I think, raised around $50 million. I have to go look, but it's been a busy year. So we have a number of kind of companies that have gone from a Series A to a Series B, as well as a number that jumped from a Series C to a Series A. So some of the fun ones, one of our first cohorts, we took in a company called Understory Weather, and he was a meteorologist out of UW-Madison. He wanted into the program with an idea for a crowdsourced device on your kitchen window that could tell you where pollution or carbon monoxide, et cetera, would be in a neighborhood. We couldn't get that. It depended on a network effect, and we couldn't crack how to scale it. And so we took him out for a beer. We asked him what he knew that no one else knew. He knows hail. We asked what was wrong with hail. He said that it falls from the cloud to the ground, but it's measured from the satellite to the cloud, and it's very windy when it falls. So as a result, we have almost no insight as to where it falls. We know where it originates. And we asked him if he could build anything to solve it, what would it be? He's now built a ground strike weather network that's deployed in at least 2, I think now 3 markets, to determine where hail falls, which is really helpful if you're trying to insure things that were potentially damaged by hail. So crops, cars, roofs, et cetera. So he raised a $7.5 million round this year. He's raised $9.5 million total. Participating on the round was True Ventures, which is the venture fund behind the Fitbit. RE Ventures, which is the venture fund behind the MakerBot 3D printer. 4490 Ventures, which is a venture fund based out of Madison, and CSA Partners out of Milwaukee. But as a part of that, he also moved, post-program, he moved from Milwaukee to Boston, or Madison to Boston. Post-investment, he's moved back now from Boston to here. So we were able to reclaim a previous graduate. Another company that raised this year and had a lot of success was called Catalyze. They're a platform for building digital healthcare solutions. And so if you want to build in an environment that's HIPAA compliant, a lot of development houses don't know how to do that. You build inside of Catalyze's environment. They also offer EHR integration, a suite of solutions that if you're looking to go to market in digital healthcare that you really want to use. And they've had tremendous success. They're based out of Madison. They raised a round led by Lewis and Clark with participation from Baird Ventures, Chicago Ventures, Arthur Ventures, and all the way to the kind of the smaller group but up and comers. So a company that was referred to us by a previous graduate, 2 MIT kids that they worked at a company called NutriClicks, which went from 0 to tens of millions of revenue bootstrapped. And it was the 4th employee. He was the marketing lead. He did all the online marketing ads. He wanted to start his own company, so he started a subscription wine company called Bright Cellars. And they allow their members to rate the wine, and then they use that information to help build new brands. So their goal is to eventually become like a Constellation or a Diageo, where they're a house of brands, and those receive a higher multiple to revenue. But they're starting with the subscription e-commerce. They'd like to take the most popular brands that they build to store shelves and then grow from there. But they came to our program about a year ago. They were 2 founders and a first employee. They resettled in Milwaukee. They're now, I think, 24 employees full-time. Wow. They're about to cross into the 8-figure revenue mark, and it's been a really nice run from, we invested a couple,
it's a good year,
maybe 300 or 400 subscribers. Now they're shipping tens of thousands of bottles of wine a month. So it's been fun watching all these founders come through, and they've these kind of trash can dreams and, a buddy or two that they're working with. And then you get to walk into their office and they're employing 10 and then 30 and then 50. I think our East Street employs, 150 now. They're the biggest one. But, the 500 employees that now work at Generator portfolio companies, that's been really fun to see grow over the last few years,
too. Yeah,
that's
really interesting. In a city like Milwaukee, where at best the stories in the newspaper are equal, but generally tending towards the negative for early stage community entrepreneurialism, early stage investment, et cetera.
Right.
How do you and Troy and the rest of the team at Generator sort of power through those preconceptions? How big of a disadvantage is that in terms of attracting portfolio companies? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, we think anyone investing in a region that's capital constrained, because it's capital constrained, and because the public is so reliant on a functioning venture market to drive growth in its community, that it does serve a quasi-public trust role. And so, we're privately funded. We're really proud of that. We don't take government money, but we do view our outcomes as affecting a community. I think there's 38 full-time employees per city block. And so, when we think of 500 employees in 3 or 4 years, we're thinking, that's filling 15 city blocks, whatever that's too many, but 10, somewhere between 10 and 15 city blocks. And so we think that there's a public trust that all of us in this work share. The effect of it is that we want to be as upfront in that dialogue about how to produce a better outcome for our communities. Our Madison, really, if you look at the profile of the state of Wisconsin and gauge how much capital we import to grow new jobs, Wisconsin's lagging behind Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan. The numbers are frustrating, and the Midwest in general is lagging behind other regions. And so the question for all of us is, how do we finance tomorrow? And that goes beyond just the kind of moral obligation to the practical implications for our portfolio. If a portfolio that succeeds, a company that succeeds, every $4 of market cap that they create, it's about $1 of paid in capital. So if you want to create $1 billion winner, there's no way you can do that without importing capital into the state of Wisconsin. And so the question for us is, for that outside capital that's looking at all these other investment opportunities, what are we doing to make ourselves more compelling for that capital? And I think it requires a look at the full spectrum of how we build and grow companies to do it right. And so I think we're looking at really a bundle of sticks that we need to figure out how to deal with. But the first one that's the most frustrating for us is that we are really seeing a gap between the infrastructure, especially in Milwaukee, designed to foster new company creation and the actual quantifiable output of that company creation.
Say a little more about that. What do you mean by that?
So if you look at how much capital is being imported into Milwaukee relative to Madison, just this quarter. In Madison, you have Ionic, which raised, 10 or 12 million led by General Catalyst. You have Propeller Health, which raised a $20 million plus round led by Social Plus Capital and 3M. You have East Street, which has just closed off a $21 million Series C. You have Catalyze, which raised a $7.5 million round led by Lewis and Clark. I'm missing rounds here. I know Allergy Almeret raised $1 million. We're looking at, Moxie raised $5 million. And I know I'm missing more. We're looking at, just on the numbers I gave you, we're looking at what, 60, 70, $80 million in a quarter imported into a community to create wealth and jobs. I'm struggling to think of one or two in Milwaukee. Maybe there's 15 million or 20. Point being, it's a fraction of what's going on, even relative to a market 1/3 of our size. And that's not atypical.
And an hour away.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's not atypical. And so we think what's going on kind of writ large is the economy is transitioning from a manufacturing economy to a digital economy. And Madison doesn't have this rich manufacturing base. So they're not tied to a historic narrative about who they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to do it. They know they have a deep research university and a lot of people who are capable of arbitraging their labor to create what we think are the next generation of manufacturing companies, digital houses that write code instead of produce products. In Milwaukee, we have this narrative about how we want to be a manufacturing city. Our challenge is we have a lot of startups in our portfolio with a manufactured product. But unlike in previous generations, and I think, I'm not acting like a historical economic historian here, but kind of whenever I go through a tour of a local manufacturing company like a Briggs or a Generac or a Harley or any number of local legends, they have this kind of wall of history, which typically starts with a manufactured product that they use, a hero product that they use to expand their manufacturing capabilities. And that was done here in Wisconsin. And that birthed a cluster of manufacturing partners who were able to support that. If someone didn't have the right machine, they would go, to an OEM to help build that, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Today's generation of startups, step one, you build a prototype. Step two, you outsource to Shenzhen. And as a result, the narrative of how we're going to grow and build the next wave of new companies in Wisconsin just is historically disrupted. And I think Milwaukee hasn't really gotten the memo. By contrast, what resources we have used to deploy to venture have, a lot of that's been pulled out of the private equity markets or the kind of service, companies that had a good service story and sold on a service provider narrative as opposed to a product narrative, especially a digital product narrative. And so we're trying to figure out how do we tie into this national venture capital scene as we're getting further and further away in terms of social network, in terms of domain experience, and in terms of resource and infrastructure. And we think it's a economic threat to the well-being of the city that we're not positioning this kind of 15 to 20 or 25 year investment now. And again, it might not be caught in the near short run, but in the long term, we continue to see a lot of capital imported into Madison, and you're hard pressed to figure out how Milwaukee's going to catch up unless it's the most capital efficient city in the state. Yeah. I suspect that's not the case.
That's a really interesting and very different, more tangible explanation than I was thinking about. But on the more nebulous side, when you think about things like, there's plenty of articles about the spirit of helpfulness in Silicon Valley and Midwesterners being afraid to fail and things of that nature. Where do those contribute?
It's weird that we don't see. We have no opinion on where the entrepreneurs apply to from our program. In other words, I hope I get them from everywhere. The gap in terms of the number of applicants from Milwaukee is requires something beyond just a working capital explanation. There's something culturally that's going on in the city that's inhibiting new startup formation. We pull a lot of our graduates out of business plan competition. So understory through business plan competition. I was with some computer science professors from UW last night. They after I went home, sent me an email showing me how they had awarded a prize to Each Street, then Badger Bites in the computer science business plan competition, for example. And it makes a difference because it helps them grow. Scanalytics, Allergy Amulet. There's a number of our companies we found kind of in these business plan competitions or through them. We haven't had any success in Milwaukee on that just one channel, for example. Mm-hmm. But there's 4 or 5 other channels that we're just not seeing produce new companies that are reaching venture markets. And I suspect that it's also a proxy for how many are not reaching just kind of lifestyle stage or not necessarily venture scale, but bankable companies, et cetera. So we don't know. I can tell you writ large what we think the state needs to do is go on the offense here. So when you look at those rankings, for example, we're by my math somewhere between 600 to 800 entrepreneurs short a year at least. I think we're actually about 1,400 short. How do you I run a program that invests in 10 to 15 companies a year with Troy and others. We are unable to bridge that gap of that scope. Yeah. Hopefully we can be a cultural lighthouse to help draw more people in, but I think we need to look at structural changes. The one that I come back to is I'm a free market person. I find terms like non-compete to be wildly inconsistent with free markets. I think it's legitimate for the government to step in to protect the people, to step in to protect the function of free markets when large companies inhibit the movement of labor. And so I think for a state that's behind the curve, I think looking at how do we get 300, 400, 500 entrepreneurs off the bench via repealing non-competes would be a really good start. I think supporting our research universities and working with them collaboratively to pull more startups out of the research labs would be step 2. I think there's 5 or 6 steps we could take to go on offense to solve this problem, but there's very little will or very little kind of candid dialogue about what's going on relative to we're still lamenting city blocks falling into poverty and not connecting it to the fact that when you create a startup job, they hire someone who would have worked somewhere else, who would have worked somewhere else, who would have worked somewhere else, and you move everyone up in terms of their job opportunity, not just the startup job created, but everyone who moves along that scale. By contrast, I feel like every day we're pulling another chair out in terms of someone leaving the community or a job leaving the community. And while we continue to lament what's happening on the floor, we have no plan to succeed at the ceiling. And I think that that's a structural problem for especially the city of Milwaukee, but I think the region in general, and something I hope that we get around lest another community figure out how to be what we used to pride ourselves on, which was the economic engine of the country.
Mm-hmm. As you expand Generator into Beloit and the Twin Cities, how does that become nuanced? What are the differences you're expecting to see in those communities?
Yeah, so we think, Generator is really a store with 3 products. So we have our venture fund, which is our core accelerator, which is ranked nationally and we're really proud of. And that's where we continue to take in those 700 applications and select 5 or 6 or whatever. Our second product is the corporate series that we run. So we run these on-ramp conferences, and we run out Soldier Field and have corporations meet with startups to try to engage the community in creating wealth for itself. And then the third one is this
corporate innovation programs.
Corporate innovation. We say, well, yeah, we also, we work with, I think, over a dozen corporations now formally on stuff like that. So, but we don't publicize it as much, but we're really, we need all the stakeholders to be successful for this to work, and large corporations are kind of central for that. And then our third product that we're really excited about is our G-Beta, which is a truncated version of Generator. It's paid for on a services model or a sponsor model. So it's no fees, no equity for participating startups. And we put them through a 7-week process that resembles the full 12-week Generator program, where we invest community, mentorship, network, and experience. And they get treated like any other startup would get treated by Generator, where we give them the full suite of resources to help them grow. And what we're trying to do is bridge that gap from what's going on in the university to what's going on in the private market by offering a private market vendor to help connect those 2 processes. So we partnered first. It was sponsored by American Family Research or American Family Ventures, which it still is. We then partnered with Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation to offer it more formally at Madison. So G-Beta runs 3 times a year in Madison. The goal is that we get 3, 4, 5 seed startups coming out of the program, and hopefully that produces a consistent Series A or B per community.
Yeah, there were a couple of good ones in this past cohort a couple of months ago, right?
Yeah,
we met Paul Hansen. We spent a little time with Remugio.
Yeah,
really
sure.
Good.
Yeah, so that's a company that he actually applied, I think, to the first G-Beta. We gave him some feedback. He was great. He came back with a different model, and it really improved on we thought it improved on the concerns that we had. So we're really bullish on what Paul's doing, and that's the type of thing we want to see happen. I think he's got a PhD, and there's 2 or 3 PhDs and a whole range of skill sets in that company. So really bright people doing some exciting work. We expanded that program to Minnesota. Mark McGuire runs it. He's joined the Generator program as a partner. In Mark's background, we call it the Jellyfish Mafia, but a group of founders who built and sold the company to Microsoft for a lot of money in about 15 months. I think 12 months. And he's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. He's had successes and failures. And so he's moved to Minnesota and he's in G-Beta there now. We haven't announced the cohort yet, but I think it's December 8th is his graduation. And then we'll be running a Generator venture fund, a Generator accelerator later next year as well. And we're in talks with a couple other universities. We're hoping to keep expanding G-Beta to new markets and use that as a platform to build the rest of the Generator program on, at least across the Midwest in the next 18 to 36 months.
Do you see Minneapolis, St. Paul as closer to a Madison type of an environment for early stage as opposed to Milwaukee?
Yeah, it's really, I would say Detroit's closer to Madison than Milwaukee in terms of that dynamic. Milwaukee, I was telling someone, if you just look at the numbers by capital imported into the community, it's not that we want to be Cleveland, it's that we want to be South Cleveland. It's a fraction of what a lot of these Midwestern communities are doing. So, we definitely see Minneapolis. They just had a big exit with a company called Sport Engine to NBC Comcast, which is a tremendous win. They've had, probably a half dozen digital success victories over the past 10 years, which, I think Milwaukee's got Wannable in that category, 7 Summits in that category, but nothing like that NBC Comcast consistent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 narrative that they've got going. So it's definitely closer. They have a research university, which helps. They have a state capital nearby, which helps. So there's a lot going on there, but I think Milwaukee sees it as a peer, and so I think Milwaukeeans are surprised to learn that Minneapolis is looking more from an economic perspective like Madison than Milwaukee is in terms of venture capital.
Given that you guys are privately funded and all of the challenges that are going on, there has to have been a lot of support over the last 5 years. Where has that come from primarily?
Yeah, so we have investors. They want us to make money. So we started the first fund. Two co-founders and partners, Dan Armbrust and Dan Bader, Those were the first two investors. We then spun it out, and so we now have 15 limited partners. And so Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation is, for example, one of them. MG&E in Madison is one of them. CSA Partners in Milwaukee, Chris Abley's venture-funded team, and Wisconsin Investment Partners, along with a lot of very private, successful entrepreneurs who formed the backbone of our angel network. Mm-hmm. So, people were like Mark Grosskopf or John Miller or Don Layden. There's a whole host of partners we've worked with that help us do the angel rounds as well. But we're dependent on engagement from our stakeholders, and we're really a reflection of them. So we're grateful for them, and we take. We're in our fourth or fifth year. The paid-in capital is $100 million. The revenue from the portfolio companies, just 2 or 3, are over $30 million. So I'm optimistic. They've got a nice terminal value that's well above zero at this point. But we view, again, the part of the trust as we have to make them money because they deserve it, and because we want to send the appropriate market signal, which is you can invest in our best and brightest and win. And that's dependent on this group of angels and venture funds, making a profit on what we've done here.
This particular group of companies, the cohort that will be premiered on Thursday.
Yeah.
You want to spend a little bit of time on those, on that group?
So there's 6 companies. If they listen to this, they'll check me to see if I get their value propositions right. But they're from all around the country. 2 of them are actually moving here most likely. So I'll let them announce, but you can try to guess which of the 6. So we have ThirdParty Trust, which is a cybersecurity company that sells a software as a service product to help companies manage their vendor risk. So you can imagine if you want to have anything, there's all sorts of vendors a company has. This manages their compliance with your security requirements, monitors any sort of dark web activity regarding whether they've had trouble, and then it helps you proactively work with them as opposed to this kind of one-to-many security compliance. You can have a one-to-one where you're sending the same set of email instructions or questionnaires. All of them can fill out a standard template and then have that monitored. From the vendors, it's nice because then they can fill out one form, and then instead of having to fill out 50 separate security compliance docs, they can just have the consistent across market.
That's interesting, given the expansion of vendor risk management as an entire armies of people, and especially the large financials and all of the regulated industries, right? That's interesting market opportunity.
This is a founding team. They've got masters in cybersecurity. They worked at IBM. I mean, they're pretty smart group, and they were addressing their own problems, which is, I think, again, it tells you how this space is really heated up. The next is a referral. We have this MIT bloodline. So we had a Keurig for smoothies that self-cleans, which referred in an e-commerce company around wine, which referred in a software as a service company that's kind of neighbor-to-neighbor marketing. So what it does is it identifies micro-influencers for your brand. It helps capture current customers who have a social identity and helps them empower them to spread good things about you. And it also engages people who you hadn't worked with before to help do that. And so they've really rolled through our corporate network and picked up a lot of clients. So I'm proud. I'm not sure whether we're getting more revenue from us or more financing from us, but it's gone really well. And they've just been a real pleasure to work with, as all of them have. Exit 7C is a software. It's a mobile application for vendor management, for fleet management. So if you have anywhere from 5 to 50 vehicles that you have people driving around a geographic location, it'll help identify the cheapest place to get gas. Typically these fleet drivers are choosing their gas station based on their favorite food or whatever sort of amenity they want to go to the gas station for. They're choosing it based on price, and so you can know that you're maximizing that 10 to 30 cents a gallon difference that you might see across a geographic area in terms of gas prices. And then it's also doing it via ACH. So the goal is to save their fleet managers, 2 to 4 or even 5% a month on their fleet prices. Eventually it could go consumer, but I think it's about a $3 billion market just in fleets.
A little bit of risk reduction there too, right? For the subscribers in terms of the electronic payments instead of running credit cards.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, the company, that's a really good point. The company was built, the founder owned a gas station, and he was victimized by those skimmers, which people put these things on gas to steal credit card information. And there was a front page journal story, I think, about how 30 gas stations were found to have them in the Milwaukee area. So it's a real issue. For the gas station owner, it's devastating because their drop of business to them is just drastic. So they're hoping for something like this where they don't have to retrofit, 6-figure pumps every time to get it enabled. And this software allows them to do that. We have Yacht Life, which is a company we met in Miami. We have kind of a Miami theme to Generator now. Both
I did love the range.
Yeah.
What is it? Pretty litter to yacht life.
Yeah.
Right?
We, it's, you never know what you're going to get to work with in life. And so, like I said, we like digital marketplaces that are first to market and have the chance to get a big multiple. And the yacht market is they call it they convinced me when they said that the market is really inefficient today. It's filled with bathrobe brokers, which are apparently people who you call and you get these yachts rented on you call somebody on like a, Michael Douglas phone from that 1980s movie you book a yacht and, these are really expensive purchases. So every one of these commissions is, I think somewhat similar to a commission on a car sale, and the market's huge. When we were in Miami, I was watching these yachts just roll out into the ocean, and yacht after yacht after yacht. It's actually much more vibrant than I thought, and
with tickets in the tens of millions, right?
Right. I mean, I think they're one of somebody. People are looking at 5-day yacht charters around the Bahamas with your own chef and stuff, and we're happy to help arrange that for a fee. So it's been a lot of fun working with a company that's in Ibiza and Dubai and Miami. So we've had a lot of fun with that, and the clientele's been pretty cool. But it's a great company, and I'm optimistic they're going to raise a really exciting round out of Generator. The next one is, like you just mentioned, Pretty Litter. So Pretty Litter's a subscription e-commerce company around cat litter. It's really got a number of competitive advantages. One, he's got it down to, traditional cat litter is 10 to, I'm not a cat owner, but I understand. I went and looked at the grocery store. It looked like 10-pound bags to 30-pound bags even potentially. He's got it down to a 3-pound bag. It uses evaporation as opposed to clumping. It's all sorts of stuff because of the crystal nature. And so that enables shipping or e-commerce and monthly subscription. And then the second is he added a second 10x benefit, which is the cat litter changes colors based on the health of your cat. And so if your cat has a pH problem or has blood in the urine, or he said it's 70% of the issues that might cause you to go to your veterinarian, then this will display that. So interestingly, when he first started, he had a lot of churn because people with really elderly cats were ordering it. The cat would get it. It wasn't showing signs of being unhealthy. And then all of a sudden the cat would, suddenly they realize that the cat is quite ill. But now that he's been marketing it both on the subscription benefit and the health benefit, the average age of the cats has fallen, which is refreshing for us on a churn level. But he's had a remarkable run. We worked with him, and he did a great job getting a website refresh. He engaged some e-commerce marketing experts. He sold more on October 9th. I think he had sold in the previous 2 or 3 months combined. He ran out of cat litter, so I learned a lot about how you order cat litter from China on a crate overnight. So we've had. Yeah, it's been fun, like getting you learn a lot about like the global market on a bunch of random stuff, and cat litter is one of them. But he's pretty popular at these investor pitches at the moment, and he's doing a really nice job. So, and did I list 5 or 6? I'm trying to think if I missed
ParkX.
Oh, ParkX, yeah. ParkX is a company out of Chicago. So we have 3 Chicago companies, and ParkX is building Airbnb for parking. So he's been going to these private lots, churches, building owners.
Not hard to find need in Chicago, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he's enjoying the World Series a lot. Yeah. And where Spot Hero or some of these other companies have, for example, if you want to get into a garage, ParkX has a piece of hardware that's, I think about $100 a month or $100 a year. And you can enable people to use their mobile app to get in and out of garages. So we've actually had a lot of customers sign up who are just looking for, let's say you're in a condo and you're in a basement garage. Now, instead of having a clicker, you can just use your mobile phone to get in and out of the garage. So that's been something that he's selling $6 per spot per month for that service. And we've had hundreds of cars just this week put on just on that one part of the business model.
Surge pricing?
No, sir. Yeah, he hasn't gotten into surge pricing to date, largely because so many of his customers are monthly subscribers at this point. They find out that there's a lot, in northeast suburb of downtown, and you can pay $50 a month, and it's cheaper than the $100 a month you'd pay at one of the garages. So
remnant space.
I think 60 or 70% of his now are monthly subscribers, but we're starting to see a lot larger and faster uptick in terms of the transactional stuff, which is what we get really excited about. But again, it's another one where I think even the top players in the market, they're only in 6 cities. So there's still a lot of market to be had, and he's got some really exciting competitive advantages that we're anxious to see get going. And he's also similarly had a lot of success building around in the program and all 6 have been, it's a lot of fun to work with. Anything from private parking to, as you mentioned, yachts to cat litter to cybersecurity. You're not bored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like you probably have a fun job, right? I mean,
Yeah.
learning how to order cat litter from China is one thing, but all of the variety that you're talking about there has got to be an interesting day-to-day adventure.
Yeah, I tell people they typically call when something goes really awful or really awesome. So with 48 portfolio companies, if they just have one every 6 weeks, it's a call a day. Typically, unfortunately, it's more than that. But we really get to know them and work with them when there's very little around the company. And so as a result, I think we get to hang out a little bit longer because we know them so well personally, and they know that we've seen them when they were at their most vulnerable. So it creates a really great long-term relationship.
Yesterday, so Business Journal article today on Vivek Wadhwa.
Sure, yeah.
Stanford and Singularity U, right?
Yeah.
Futurist. He talked about a target in order to make Milwaukee an innovation hub of 500 to 1,000 startups.
Yeah.
What do you think is a realistic target in 17 and 18 for seed companies?
Let's just do the non-compete. We have a population of 6 million. Let's presume, and I don't know this number, 2 million are in the workforce. And let's presume a third of them are subject to a non-compete. I mean, everybody at Epic is subject to a non-compete. I'm sure there's, I think Jimmy John's employees are subject to a non-compete. Like, it's pretty ridiculous. Let's assume it's 600,000, right? Let's assume 1 in 1,000 of those start a company when the non-competes are revealed. Just 1 in 1,000. Yeah. That's 600 new entrepreneurs a year. Yeah. So if you want to go to that target of that number, I think if we think in terms of these structural changes we can make, that would, maybe not every state needs to repeal their non-competes because, it's sunny and they got mountains and like people are creative when they're walking in the mountains. I have no idea. But like, it's clear we need to do something. And so I don't want to hear a relative argument about, well, so-and-so. To me, it's, hey, if, there's a group called Be Bold Wisconsin, and everything I saw was kind of imitative Wisconsin. If we want to be bold Wisconsin, what is it that we need to do? And this to me is, the fact that it's the most recent legislature, there was a bill introduced with a lot of groups that supported it to strengthen non-compete laws. Where it is now is you have the presumption that any term that's overbroad causes the whole provision to fail. So as a result, if you make it for 9 months when it should have been 6 months or 12 months to 9 months, you're incented to draw as narrow of a non-compete as possible. And that's as much in the enforcement as it is in the design. Sure. Yep. So in other words, it affects 1,000 to 1 in the design as it does into the enforcement. And the enforcement numbers are not the issue. It's who's subject to it. The second is, so let's just assume that we pull those people into the workforce. Second, what they proposed was that they were going to strengthen it. So now if any provision was overbroad, you could change it to rewrite it to be appropriate. So now if I'm an employer, talk about an incentive change. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to say, Todd, you can't compete with me anywhere under any circumstance for any period of time. Right. And then when I sue you and we go to court and you're living paycheck to paycheck and I'm a conglomerate, a judge will rule later on what it was. Well, that harms the company that was going to employ you. That it harms the free flow of labor in markets. And so why would we ever accept a company that contracts to impede the free flow of markets is a question for we the people to decide. But I think right now we've been going in the wrong direction. But when it comes to those types of grand challenge questions, we can design answers. It's just whether we have the will to do it. And I don't know who we're protecting. This is a rule to protect large and established corporations. And if the whole thing is, we need to set a goal to create new ones, then we probably do need to weaken our rules around large established corporations. But in terms of whether it helps those corporations or hurts them, I tend to think competition makes you stronger. And so if they're avoiding it via monopoly power, then I suspect that that's a part of the reason why they're probably struggling against incumbents in other markets who aren't inhibited by that monopoly power.
I mean, I can remember radio shows, whether it be Charlie Sykes or Mark Belling 15 years ago about Silicon Valley. We missed the boat, right? Here's a whole region but to your point, again, what I think I heard was, what do we need to do to be innovative and so forth in this community, as opposed to trying to be something that represents.
Right.
Is that your point?
Yeah, I guess relative to how internally at Generator we're proud to be nationally ranked in anything. I don't think I ever thought I'd be nationally ranked in something that wasn't notorious. So, we're proud of that fact. And we didn't get there by thinking, well, relatively, how do we get better than Cap Innovators or Brandery? I think it was just, how do we wake up tomorrow and do our job better than we did it today? And I don't know that, the relative arguments, I suspect if we just wake up and say, okay, what could we do here to improve our outcome tomorrow, and designed it every day in that fashion, we'd wake up 3, 4, 5, 6 years out, and suddenly we wouldn't be 50th anymore in those rankings. We'd be 35th or 30th or 25th. And not only would the absolute number be better, but suddenly the recognition that, hey, we've got something right and we're improving, I think would produce a lighthouse effect that made us all that much more excited about what we could be the next day after.
I think that's an interesting sort of systems approach to it, right?
Right.
Yeah, interesting. So
I really enjoyed this. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you for taking the time. Man.
Yeah, I can tell you that I think all of us need a nice, referring to earlier, a nice trip to the beach with a nice stiff drink.
Yeah, maybe on a yacht.
On a yacht would be, yeah, I'll take it, yeah.
So those were the best bits of my conversation with Joe Kirgues. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen or watch the show. You can find us and subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or YouTube at the Growth Minded Podcast channel. Share it with your friends and colleagues, the ones that you think could benefit from insights Joe shared. Join us in a couple of weeks when we sit down with one of my favorite entrepreneurs in the area, Randy Spalding. Randy launched Spalding Clinical and Spalding Medical over the past several years, and he joins me in the studio. Without exception, he's the most passionate founder, CEO I've met so far. We'll see you then. Thanks.